on our country. We have no time to waste to protect our country. And with that, with great pride, I'm pleased to yield to a ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, a person who has stood tall and strong and showed us a path on how we can work together in a bipartisan way to do just that, protect our country, Congressman, Ranking Member Adam Schiff. Schiff?
Madam Leader, I thank you. As many of you know, Leader Pelosi served as the Ranking Member on the Intelligence Committee and as an ex officio member has a longer tenure on this committee than any other member of the House. We are gathered, the current and former members of the Intelligence Committee, to express our strong support for the men and women of the intelligence community who were denigrated by the President's performance yesterday, whose work, difficult work, often life-risking work, was undermined by the chief executive of the country, who disregarded their conclusions, who essentially sided with the perpetrator of the election interference rather than siding with his own Justice Department and intelligence community. We have worked closely with the men and women of the IC cumulatively for decades and decades. We have the greatest respect for the work that they do, and to see that their work product would be so cavalierly discarded was something that shocked us all. But what the President did yesterday in Helsinki went beyond disrespecting the men and women of the intelligence community. It was a wholesale betrayal of the values and interests of this country. Ronald Reagan once said that he didn't leave the Democratic Party left him. Had there been any doubt, it was removed yesterday. The Republican Party has left Ronald Reagan. There is nothing left of his legacy in the GOP as represented by this president. This president said yesterday that as between the word of his own intelligence director and the word of Vladimir Putin, who strongly asserted that he was not responsible for the election hacking, he didn't know who to believe except that he can't imagine why the Russians would have done what they did. I do not, for one, believe that the president could possibly be so naive as to take the word of this former KGB operative. I believe the president somehow feels this is in his personal self-interest. His only ideology is self. But whatever the motivation is, the result is clear and unequivocal, and that was a denigration of our country, its justice system, its intelligence community, its values, its alliances. He is realigning our country not with fellow democracies, but with fellow autocrats. And as men and women who have served with our intelligence community to help strengthen democracies and democratic institutions around the world, and to fight authoritarian regimes who would undermine the freedoms of people around the world, that was an unprecedented betrayal. And so I'm proud to join with my colleagues in condemning what we saw and voicing our strong support for the men and women of the IC and the unparalleled work product that they produce. I thank you, Madam Leader.
Mr. Ruppersberger.
My great pleasure to introduce my predecessor, Dutch Ruppersberger, a wonderful former ranking member and probably someone who represents more of the IC than just about anyone else.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader Pelosi, for bringing us together. The first thing, I want to reiterate to all of my colleagues that we stand behind the intelligence community. Intelligence has been said one of the best defenses against terrorism, nuclear weapons, all of the issues that we deal with. I represent NSA, so I spend a lot of time dealing with cybersecurity. And when President Trump first was elected, I sent him a letter, and I said to him that as President of the United States, you need to make sure you know the threat of cyber attacks, one of the most serious threats we have other than maybe nuclear weapons. And I never got a call back. It was as if he didn't care. Now, I want to talk about the Putin's suggestion with our president about the task force. And this task force coming together with our country is clearly an attempt for Russia to be recognized as an equal peer in cyberspace, of which they are not. The U.S. has nothing to gain by jointly investigating anything with Russia officials in cyberspace, unless the president bluntly shows that evidence that Special Counsel Mueller put into plain English for him on Friday must be addressed with Putin. The indictment by the Department of Justice clearly lays out Russian efforts to influence the democratic process in this country. And it is clear that our president's performance yesterday, when he was in Putin's palm, that he was unable. He is unable to confront Russia on anything. Now, the task force is not necessarily for the purposes of investigating what happened in 2016. We know what happened in 2016. A task force would only bolster the green light our president has given by Putin by giving them greater insight into our investigations, mindset, and playbooks. If they want to collaborate and show that they will properly act with us going forward, so-called cyber norms, I think it's a conversation our State Department is already having, and one which started in previous administrations, and that Trump should support that effort instead of denouncing it. This really is about our democracy and the rule of law in the United States of America. And when you attack our democracy, we must call you out for that on the national stage. And I'd like to introduce Terry Sewell, who I served together on the Intelligence Committee. Said Terry. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm honored to stand here with current and former members of the Intelligence Committee. As the proud representative of Selma, Alabama, I have to tell you there is nothing more heartbreaking to me than a president who refuses to stand up for our democracy in the face of overwhelming evidence that our elections were under attack. 2 years after we first learned of Russia's hack of the DNC, we now know more about the full breadth of Russia's attack. We know that Russia targeted our election infrastructure itself and hacked computer networks containing voter information. We know that Russia's actors posted more than 3,000 advertisements on Facebook in an attempt to influence our elections. They were so bold as to sponsor pages that were named Black Activists and paid for it in no less than rubles. Their sole purpose was to sow swords of discord. Swords of discord throughout our nation. We have to guess that they did so because they knew that having a covert influence campaign would have an effect on our election. We know that Russia specifically targeted minority voters in an attempt to sow discord in the American public and encourage minority voters to stay at home. Yes, Russia's attack was no less than voter suppression. The evidence supporting these facts is overwhelming. For starters, Russia actors paid for their ads on social media in rubles and often blatantly stated where their location would be in Russia, second-guessing the intelligence agency's reports that Russia is responsible for interfering in our elections by this president is no less than ignorant and woefully disrespectful of the fact that these men and women of the intelligence agencies put their life on the line day in and day out to protect our democracy and for the leader of our nation to go against their word, to throw them under the bus, if you will, was unconscionable. In this case, the attack comes at the expense of our democracy. And when Trump undermines our intelligence agencies, when he undermines our courts and our free press, he is playing into the hands of a dictator. He is failing our democracy and the generations of Americans who fought, bled, and many who died in my state of Alabama for the right to vote in free and fair elections. Now is not the time for Republicans to issue half-hearted statements reacting to President Trump's friendship with Putin. Now is the time for Congress and the Republicans that
$180 million out of the Appropriations Committee, my subcommittee, Financial Services. The decimal point was in the wrong spot. But every state applied for that money. Most states maxed out because it simply isn't enough money to handle the technology they need, the training they need, and the equipment they need. So this year we attempted to put another $380 million into that same pot. It was zeroed out by my Republican colleagues on a partisan vote. This week, the Republicans will get an opportunity to show which side they are on. After the extraordinary performance by the president in Helsinki, I'm asked the most common question is, what do you want the Republicans to do? I said, in addition to supporting and defending the Mueller investigation, they can do something this week. They can vote for a very simple amendment that restores that $380 million. Because they're all distancing themselves from the president, but a tweet is one thing. Actions are another. This week in that committee, we will have a vote and whether or not the Republicans want to support the critical funding we need to defend our election infrastructure. Let's find out which side they're on. I'm pleased now to bring on a colleague of mine who has served extraordinarily well on this investigation, Representative Castro from Texas.
Thank you, Congressman. Like millions of Americans, I was stunned yesterday to watch what was essentially a treacherous act by the President of the United States. First, he should never have gone to Helsinki to meet with Vladimir Putin, most especially after the latest round of indictments of 12 Russian intelligence officers who our intelligence community believes and knows tried as hard as they could to interfere with our democracy in 2016. But once the president made the decision to go and meet with Vladimir Putin, the first thing he should have demanded was that those 12 individuals, as well as the folks who had been indicted before from Russia, should have been made available for extradition to the United States. Rather than trying to come up with a plan for Syria or anything else, that should have been a precondition for the President of the United States. You know, along with Adam and Mike and others, Eric, on the Intelligence Committee right now, we spent hours and hours and hours listening to testimony from a variety of witnesses. And during all of that testimony, not once, and during this investigation, not once did the Republican leadership use the subpoena power to subpoena travel records or bank records or do anything that would verify the information that was being told to us. This Congress also has not done anything, as Congressman Quigley said, to make sure that our election systems are secure. Many Americans are surprised to realize that there isn't a single federal law, and not a state law that I can find, that requires any level, even a basic level, of election security protection for our voting systems. There are no standards in place that say what an election administrator in a certain county has to do to protect our election systems. And that's astounding in 2018. The fact that Russia did interfere in our 2016 election and that the president, by his presence there at that summit, by his praise for Vladimir Putin, by his unwillingness to ask for the extradition of the 12 Russians who interfered with our election, he has given Vladimir Putin, Russia, and others who would do the United States harm the green light to interfere again in 2018, 2020, and beyond. And we have to make sure that we do everything that we can domestically to secure our elections, but also with our allies to form a kind of cyber NATO, a mutual defense pact when it comes to cyberspace. NATO, of course, deals with a defense pact when you have a physical intrusion of an allied country. The nations then join together in defense. No such thing exists at all in cyberspace. It's clear that the times demand that we make that happen. Thank you. Now I'll introduce Congressman Hines from Connecticut.
Thank you, Joaquin. And I'm delighted to join my Intelligence Committee colleagues here to reflect on the disgraceful performance of the president in Europe and, of course, in Helsinki in particular. We don't do this with any mirth or joy or with any partisan intent. We do this because traditionally politics have stopped at the water's edge, but traditionally the President of the United States has been an advocate and a supporter of U.S. interests abroad. And so it is terribly important today that all of us stand up to the men and women of the intelligence community who were disrespected off of our shores by the President of the United States. It is important that our adversaries hear that the opinions of the president with respect to the attack on our election are not the opinions of the United States government. They are the opinions of one man in the United States government. To the Russians, I would say, we know exactly what you did, how you did it, and we will work very hard to make sure that you do not do it again. Now, we're at a point in time where Republicans, some of them, are standing up to the president and saying this is not acceptable, this is not American. An awful lot of other Republicans are saying, but what can I do? And you've heard some answers here today around cybersecurity, election protection. that the very top of the list of what can I do is to protect the investigation, which has produced so much information, both about people associated with the President of the United States, as well as information about the full depth of the attack on our election. There is a bill that has come out of Senate Judiciary, backed by Republicans and Democrats, that awaits action on the floor, action that has been denied by Majority Leader McConnell. That should pass the Senate and pass the House this week. Protecting Mueller is essential for a bunch of reasons. Number one, the critics of the Mueller investigation have been wrong at every turn. Whether it was those who, like Chairman Nunes, vouched for the honesty of Mike Flynn, an individual who subsequently pled guilty to lying to the FBI, to, in the House side, a report, an absurd report that came out of the Intelligence Committee denying what the intelligence community and the Senate Intelligence Committee concluded, which is that Russia undertook this attack for the express purpose of installing Donald Trump as president. They have been wrong. They should defer now to the fact that it is others who will tell us what happened. Number two, the president seems to have a profound interest in this investigation, and he should understand that there is one thing and one thing only that will clear him if he is innocent of collusion, as he maintains, and that is finishing this investigation. If he is in fact blameless and innocent, this investigation and only this investigation will tell that story. Most importantly, of course, is as recently as yesterday, we saw the indictment of Maria Butina, something that many of us up here on this podium did not see coming. Day in and day out, the investigation produces more detail about the mechanics of the attack on the core of our democracy. And if this investigation does nothing else, painting a picture of the details of those mechanics so that the American people can understand how they were manipulated, so that all of us can understand what the appropriate response must be, is essential to the integrity of this country and to the thing that makes this country exceptional, which is that power lies with the governed and it is expressed through elections. The first thing my Republican colleagues should do today is to protect that all-essential investigation. That is how we protect our democracy. With that, I understand we turn to question and answers to be moderated by Leader Pelosi.
Thank you very much. I take great pride in the membership of our Intelligence Committee, past and present. As Ranking Member Schiff mentioned, I served on that committee myself, and I was ranking member at one point. So I knew the challenges that members face there. That's why when I had the privilege of making appointments as leader and as speaker and now as leader again, I want nothing but the best for the committee. And as you've heard, we have a great leadership on the committee. I thank our colleagues for talking about what our opportunities are, what our challenges are. And I'll also associate myself with their remarks in support of our men and women who serve us in the intelligence community. One of the sad parts of all of this has been the seemingly carelessness on the part of the Republicans and this administration, some in this administration, to make known the names and sources and methods that would be seriously damaging to those people and to our national security. I thank our colleagues, and with that, be pleased to take any questions that you may have. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yesterday you mentioned charging the students with suspicious activities for Russian agents, and you mentioned with Twitter that you're very likely to go after that. What do you mean by that?
Yes. Was that for Sewell, did you say? Schiff?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, Maria Butina was somebody that we had on our witness list that we wanted to invite to testify before our committee. Others as well that were mentioned as part of the effort to set up a back channel to the Russians. We, for example, had Paul Erickson on our list to be brought in. He was somebody who engaged in correspondence about using the NRA as a back channel to the Russians. So this is an area where we had deep concern not only in terms of the NRA as a potential back channel, but also to investigate and ensure the Russians weren't funneling money through the NRA. There is more work to be done there. We were not permitted by the GOP in the Intel Committee to do that work. And this is to underscore what Jim Himes just said, the importance of the special counsel's investigation. Had they not been able to go forward where we could not, there would have been no revelation that Maria Butina was working as an agent of a foreign power. And we have to hope that the Mueller investigation can determine whether there are others liable that were knowingly acting in concert with her. And our responsibility at this point has to be protecting that investigation.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Pelosi, do you think the impeachment effort will pick up as a result of the president's comments yesterday?
Perhaps in the country, but again, in the Congress, we want to stay focused on honoring our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution and our country, and that's our fight. Again, protecting our country has always been our first responsibility, and the Constitution as well. And the Constitution, in our view, is at risk in terms of undermining the essential right to vote, which is a sacred privilege in our country. Anybody want to speak to that? No? Yes, sir?
Perhaps for Mr. Schiff or anyone involved.
Why don't you just ask the question and we'll defer. Thank you.
The Republican authors report concluded that there was no Putin preference for Mr. Trump. He said yesterday in Helsinki that he did want Trump to win. What does that say about the integrity of that report? And second, many of you have seen the underlying intelligence. Was it inadequate tradecraft, as the Republican report suggests?
Well, first of all, we're not going to be telling you about anything about underlying intelligence, but I know many of our members would probably like to speak. Eric, do you want to speak to that? Could you hear the question there? Sure.
Byron, Vladimir Putin's own words yesterday when he said, "Yes, I did. Yes, I did." He said it twice to reaffirm he had a preference for Donald Trump, and he ordered the attack, which our intelligence community, without any conflict in that finding, believed, which the Senate also believed. And so I think, again, you have isolated in alienation Devin Nunes and Donald Trump. They are on an island that believes that there was no preference. But that defies the evidence, and because they believe that, they are doing nothing but inviting a future attack, because they're saying we will do nothing. We don't believe our own intelligence community, and that's what is such a shame about them continuing to perpetuate that myth.
Congressman Nephew?
I think I'd like to add something to this. Whomever has read the 29-page indictment that was brought forward of the 12 Russians, everyone here, present members on HPSI, past members, in reading that, we understand that it is a masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece of sources and methods, that our intelligence community was able to go so deep, so far, so broadly, that they could identify the actual individuals that helped to damage our democracy by interfering in our national elections. And to have the President of the United States stand next to an enemy of democracy, agree with him, instead of the intelligence community that produces, and we've all been responsible for it, and have been since 1977, since HPSI was first formed, to produce the best intelligence for the President of the United States of America. Why? Because intelligence is the tip of the spear. If you have great intelligence, it informs policy. So I think those underlying facts of that speaking indictment speaks to the work of the intelligence community that the President of the United States trashed along with his oath.
My name is Denny Heck. I'm from Washington State. I have the honor to serve on the Intel Committee. Look, congressional Republicans are in desperate need of an intervention to get over their addiction to Donald Trump. This has gone beyond norm-defying, beyond norm-shattering. We're now in the place of putting our country at peril in all the ways that have been enumerated here. We can set the president aside. Lord knows I would like to be able to set the president aside as a consequence of, who knows, he is woefully ignorant on an epic scale of the magnitude of the egregiousness of his statements, or he's been completely duped by Vladimir Putin, the deal maker, completely duped, or, as is increasingly plausible, he's got the goods on Trump. Whatever the case for him, it's at the doorstep of congressional Republicans who can and should act. Some have spoken up, not enough, and some of those who have spoken up have been tepid. But they all can and should act in the way that has been described here. Protecting the Mueller investigation, increase election security, increase sanctions, and the list is long and readily available. If ever there were a clarion call to put country above party, it occurred in Helsinki, Finland, and it is at the doorstep of congressional Republicans.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler.
Just quickly, I think, Byron, your question is an important one, and it was remarkable to watch Vladimir Putin basically admit that he had a favorite in the 2016 election, and for Vladimir Putin to be more honest about his interference in the Republican Party in the United States of America. And it speaks to where we are as a Congress and as a nation. And to echo what Denny said about people rising up to put country above party, it's no secret around here, a lot of people will do things to preserve their personal careers. But in times like this, I think it's important that it be said that there isn't a single person whose personal career and political career is more important right now than standing up to a president who won't stand up for America.
Mr. Langevin, did you want to say?
First of all, I want to reiterate I just want to reiterate the comments that many of my colleagues have made in supporting the members of our intelligence community. The extraordinary work that they do day in and day out to keep America safe is inspiring, and to have the President of the United States denigrate their work in the way that they did was so disrespectful and unfortunate. To see President Trump up there and again siding with with President Putin over his own members of the Intelligence Committee was really disgraceful. And I want to thank John McCain for his courage and speaking out in the way that he did, and saying that there has not been a more dismal performance by a U.S. president in recent memory going overseas. And no American wants to see their president, irrespective of party, embarrassing themselves or selling out the country in the way that the president did overseas. And this is not just a Democratic point of view. This is a bipartisan condemnation of that performance. President Trump's own ego is what is preventing him from acknowledging the clear facts that really everybody knows that Russia did interfere with our elections, and that they would likely do it again. And there are two things that we need to do. First of all, we need to speak with a clear and loud voice, and it should be starting with the President of the United States, acknowledging what the Russians did and condemning it, and then issuing a stark warning that if it happens again, that there will be severe consequences. That hasn't happened yet by part of the president. It needs to happen now. The other thing that we need to do clearly is take strong steps to make sure that we are securing our elections infrastructure and that we are being as resilient as we possibly can. The Democrats in the House have created an elections task force. We had numerous briefings by election officials across the country who came in and spoke about their experience and what they need. This House did pass, the Congress did pass $380 million in funding for securing our election infrastructure. That's a down payment. We need to do more. I've introduced a bipartisan bill with my Republican colleague, Mark Meadows, and the PAPER Act to better secure our election infrastructure. These are the things that we need to do to make sure that we are resilient going forward. We can't prevent every cyber attack, but we can take steps to make sure that we are as resilient as possible, especially when it comes to defending against a nation state. And lastly, I'll say this. We need to make sure that we communicate the message to the Russians that if they do this again, that we are going to be there with a harsh response and serious consequences. The president needs to send that message most especially.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I also want to thank John Brennan, former head of the CIA, and he used a word that is starting to pop up now, and that word is treason. I used it in a statement that I made by saying this goes beyond incompetence and it borders on treason. And guess what the responses were? They said, "What do you mean it borders on treason?" That's the kind of feedback I got from people who looked at what I was saying. We have reached a number of inflection points where we thought something now was going to happen with as a result of the actions of the President of the United States. If we, in the United States Congress, let this moment go by without anything being done about it, then shame on all of us, because when the President of the United States speaks, he does speak in the name of our country, and we must act, all of us in the Congress.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Schakowsky. And just highlighting what our colleagues have said about the important role of the intelligence community in our national security. A long time ago, when I first went on the Intelligence Committee, our work was about force protection, how we tried to prevent an initiation of hostilities from anybody or ourselves, but also if we were to engage, how we protected our force. So many things, terrorism, et cetera, have taken anti-terrorism center stage since that time. But all along, our members of the Intelligence Committee have acted with great risk to their personal lives and with great courage for our country. And again, for our Republican colleagues to be frivolous about identifying them is really so very, very wrong. I just want to recall that since the President made his statement in Helsinki, his Director of National Intelligence said, "The role of the intelligence community is to provide the best information and fact-based assessments possible for the President and policymakers." And this is what he said. Now, after the President said what he said, denigrating our intelligence community, he said, his appointee said, "We have been clear in our assessment of Russian meddling in the 2016 elections and their ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine our democracy, and we will continue to provide unvarnished and objective intelligence in support of our national security." That was his own appointee as Director of National Intelligence, countering the President's characterizations. I just want to close by saying in this month of July, as we celebrate our founders' courage and their success in establishing our great country, I want to join my colleagues How many members here? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored to stand before members of the House Intelligence Committee, past and present. Decades, in fact, over 100